Good morning. Thank you for joining us as we discuss with Murray about his sermon yesterday from Romans chapter 6, verses 1 through 14, I believe it was. Tell us a little bit about what your sermon was about.
Romans 6, 1 through 14 is dealing all with union with Christ in two particular ways. What we looked at yesterday, we looked at union with Christ means that believers who are in Him are dead to sin and alive to Christ. And so we explored what that means to be dead to sin, how it happened and the result. And then with alive to Christ, we said what that means is that we've got a sure hope of a certain future. And then as a result of that sure hope of a certain future, Christ working in our life, we ought to live as though we are alive in Christ.
Yeah. This is not an analogy or a metaphor that you used yesterday, but you talked about how we often in our lives, I mean, really almost moment by moment, we come to a crossroads where there's a sinful impulse that we have to want to sin, to be drawn towards that. And you talked about how, to think about these things of who we are in Jesus Christ. And you said, I know that sounds like a lot, but it is a lot. Talk about that a little bit more, because I think that's a real practical way in which we apply this.
Yeah, there's 5 different occasions in just 14 verses that the Apostle Paul says some version of the word know or remember or be certain of. And what he means is our primary problem is that we forget who we are when we're tempted to sin. And so the conversation ought to, in our head, be like, I'm tempted to do this because I want to. It sounds good to me, or it's appealing to me, or whatever. But my union with Christ tells me that I don't have to do it. That sin doesn't rule over me. I'm no longer its master. And if I'm no longer its master, then who do I belong to? I belong to Christ. So if I belong to Christ, then I can actually rule over the thing that threatens to rule over me. And so, as I said, that's an impossibly long conversation to have with yourself in the midst of temptation. But I think the more that we think on that, in the quieter moments of our lives, when we're not engaged in the midst of temptation, then the more readily those thoughts will come to mind when we are.
Yeah. I think along those lines, the helpful analogy that you used is, when we walk on an airplane for like an international flight and you walk by the business class and the first class, and then talked about how sin is epitomized by going back to that 33D.
Yeah.
And it's such a great analogy. But what is it, do you think, it is that makes 33D so tempting?
Right. So the picture is you've got this wonderful 1A first class seat with all of its amenities, and the miserable third seat in the middle of 2 broad-shouldered folks, 33D. Why do we want to go back? I think lots of reasons. 1, that was familiar.
Yeah.
2, we've got friends on row 33. Mm-hmm. And 3, we don't want to look different. We want to look like everybody in that part of the plane. 4, it's while the imagery of first class compared to coach breaks down relative to our sinful patterns in our new life, in that the experience of coach is one of unending luxury, but that's not the promise in Christianity. The promise instead is one of suffering and pain. Yeah. And so the experience, I wish I had thought about this yesterday actually, the experience of 33D is the illusion of pleasure and comfort. But in reality, it's not. And so we think to ourselves, well, I'm not sure I want to subject myself to a lifetime of suffering when I can, by my own eyes, live a life of pleasure. But that, of course, is the lie.
Yeah. Well, you've already kind of hinted at this a little bit. The last thing I want to ask you is, it was such a meaty passage. There's so much there, and just like with most sermons that we preach, we get to the end of the day and say, "I wish I'd said this," or "Wish I'd, maybe not said that." Is there anything else you'd like to add? Maybe something you weren't able to get in that 30 minutes that you wanted to?
I guess what I would like to say, probably, I appreciate you saying that. I guess what I'd like to say probably is that we ought to really study what it means to be unified with Christ, to be one with Christ. And so we as believers ought to take charge of that growth. Meaning, let's not just wait till next Sunday to find out a little bit more. Or let's not wait till we run across an article or somebody sends us something or a text that's encouraging. But let's take active charge of what it means to learn to be in union with Christ. I think that's part of what it means to live in new obedience. I think that's part of what Paul means by remember who you are, know who you are, be who you are. It's an owning. It's an owning who we are.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your very, very hard work, not only for this passage, but all throughout the book of Romans. And I know it's an awful lot,
Sure.
but we're really blessed by it and appreciate your time and input today. So thank you for joining us. And we would encourage you to come and worship with us at Cahaba Park next week here on what is next week? It's January the 30th
Yeah, I don't know.
at 10 o'clock down in the sanctuary to hear more about this great epistle of Paul's, and also to come and worship the one true and living God with us. So thank you. Hope you have a great week.